Hi everyone, welcome to Reason with Science. I'm your host Jitendra. This episode is with Frans De Waal. He is professor in Emory University's Psychology Department and the director of the Living Links Center at the Yerkes National Primate Research Center. He is the author of several popular books like Chimpanzee Politics, The Age of Empathy, and The Bonobo and the Atheist. His latest book is Different: Gender Through the Eyes of Primatologist. In this conversation, we talk about evolution of sex and gender in humans, primates, and mammals. Enjoy the conversation, share and subscribe to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. Hi, Frans. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Yeah, so your new book, which is Different: Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. Starting with gender itself, which is a complicated topic, controversial as well. So what a primatologist has to add on such a topic?
Well, the thing is, people often think that if we look at the primates, we see biology. And if we look at humans, we see culture. But actually, in the primates, we also see some culture because they are slow developing and they learn a lot of things during their lifetime. And in humans, of course, we also see some biology. Humans may have the illusion sometimes that they are purely cultural products, but we are organisms with lungs and hearts and brains. We are animals. And so, yeah, there's a lot of biology in human behavior too.
Yeah, so, once we think of science in general, these are like different layers, or metaphors that we use. We can call it primatologist, who is studying the behavior of primates, but then it can be evolutionary biologist or molecular biologist, right? So, but all of us, what we are trying to do is just trying to understand the similar mechanisms through different routes, right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to evolution of gender itself, what do you think, how viable the primatology approach is?
Well, we are primates. So I don't make a sharp distinction between humans and other primates. And the closest relatives that we have, chimpanzees and bonobos, they're extremely close to us. They're about as close to us as, let's say, the Asian and the African elephant. They are very different elephants, but we call them both elephants. And so we humans are basically apes. We're very different, but we're basically apes. And so for the primatologist, there is not a sharp distinction necessarily, even though we recognize that humans are intellectually quite different. But socio-emotionally, I think we are hardly different. We communicate with facial expressions like the apes. We have all sorts of sounds and gestures that we do. We react to situations like with jealousy or aggression or love. So we have all these reactions in common with them. So socio-emotionally, we are not particularly different from the apes. Intellectually, technologically, we're certainly a bit different from them. Yeah.
So in other words, what you are trying to say that we are evolved, all the apes are evolved from a common ancestor, and that's why we have something inherent, something common, which we can call, or which people call nature, right?
Yeah.
And then there is another element which is called nurture, which comes through cultural these elements. So what?
And that applies to both. So both in apes we have nature and nurture, and in humans we have nature and nurture, and that makes the picture quite complex. Because if I say humans do this kind of behavior and apes do this kind of behavior, we know that in both cases there is an environmental effect going on as well. It's not just biology we're talking about. And so the book actually offers quite a complex comparison, because our two close relatives, bonobos and chimps, are also quite different from each other. So it's a triangular comparison with one quite aggressive and male-dominated species, that is the chimpanzee, and one very peaceful and female-dominated species, that is the bonobo. And then we have humans in the caught in the middle there. So it's quite a complex comparison, but there are certain things that you see in all of them. So I start the book with a description of play by young primates. So how do they play? The young females, they are very interested in infants. They want to hold infants and they want to hold dolls. If you give them dolls, they want to hold dolls. And that's true for all the primates, not just the bonobos and chimps, but all the primates. And that is true for human children also. And the young males, they like to wrestle. They do mock fighting all the time, and they run after each other to make a fight in fun. All the male primates, young male primates do this. It's not just the apes, all of them, the monkeys also. And all human children that have been studied, boys do this more than girls. So there are certain universal differences, but there's also many differences. That's, I think, so intriguing. There's many differences that we assume that are just not there. So, for example, we assume that men are more hierarchical and better leaders because they are more hierarchical beings. That is not really confirmed, because in all the primates we find female hierarchies, we find alpha females. It's not unusual at all, alpha females and female leadership. And of course, in human society, we see the same thing. So sometimes that is assumed, and psychologists have done experiments where they put, let's say, 5 men together in a room and 5 women together in a room and see how they behave with each other when they need to make a decision. And the men are hierarchical, they make a rank order, but the women do too. And so this whole difference that we postulate very often is that men are hierarchical beings. They're not more so than women, I think.
So there are many biases in our how can we say language in our culture?
Yeah, we have a lot of biases. Some of them are based on reality. Some of them are, I think, fantasies, basically, of what we want to be or how we think we are. So in my book, I try to tease these things apart and say which differences I think are substantial and which are superficial. For example, another one really interesting. People complain often about the blue for the boys and the pink for the girls. You know, that's completely a concoction of the toy business. They have made that up. And if you test very young children on images, children of barely a year old, and you show them images on the screen, the boys look more at cars and the girls look more at faces, are more socially interested. But color doesn't matter at all. Blue versus pink doesn't do anything for them. And that shows that it is not something that is deeply ingrained in them, a preference for blue or pink. That's something that's made up.
Yeah, this is interesting because when we think of humans, I mean, our language is quite complicated. At least this is what we can agree on. And that's why we use a lot of metaphors, be it in our everyday language or in science as well, right? So let's talk about those metaphors itself. So, for example, I really like this analogy with the senior citizens. You know, when a person becomes 60, we start calling that person a senior citizen, and probably start treating them differently. But interesting thing is that when it comes to science or biology, we know that nothing specifically changes at 60. It's like gradual change, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, when it comes to sex or gender in science or in society, how that changes.
Yeah. Gender, it has an effect on how people judge things. If you say this article was written by a man and this one was written by a woman, we have already sort of preconceived opinions, which are usually in favor of the man. So that's one of the things we need to pay attention to. There's inequality between the genders. There's certain biases. And that's, of course, extremely unfair and also extremely unreasonable, because there's no reason why an article by a woman could not be just as good or better than an article by a man. So we have these kind of biases based on what we hear people say about things. I'm not dealing with that in the primates so much, even though I would say they have biases too. And like humans, they judge a situation immediately based on gender. So in humans, we know that if you show faces to humans, pictures, and you crop out all the hair and you just show the face and no makeup and no nothing, within a second, we can, with almost 100% accuracy, we can say that's a man and that's a woman. We're very good at that because we need to be good at it, because in daily interactions, it makes a huge difference if you meet a man or a woman. We have a different agenda, usually with a man or with a woman. And the other primates are just as quick with that. They judge very immediately things based on the gender of individuals. So that's a very important part of our interactions, actually. So you could call it a bias, but it's also something we have evolved to pay attention to it, really.
Yeah, so let's just leave out a bit of technical detail here about sex and gender. What is the difference and stuff?
Yeah, so sex is usually a term that we use for the biology. Sex is mostly binary, male, female. There's a small slice of individuals that is not easily classified. And so it's determined by chromosomes, hormones, brains, genitals, of course. In biology, we usually say the females are the ones with the large gametes and the males with the smaller gametes and often mobile gametes. So that's sex. And gender is how you express these differences. And the society has a big influence on that. The society tells us a man has to behave like this and a woman has to behave like that. And young children learn from a very young age onwards. They learn this is what we expect from boys, this is what we expect from girls. And that's gender. And gender is not binary. Gender is more like masculine and feminine and everything in between. And there's an enormous variability in gender. So for gender, we should never say it is male or female. That's not a good way of putting it. And the flexibility of gender, which we often call gender diversity, that you can find in the other primates too. So in the other primates, you may find individuals who are born as a female, but they don't act like a female. I describe in my book a female chimpanzee named Donna, who is clearly born as a female, but the older she got, the more she looked like a male. And she had big hair and big head, and she acted like a male. She associated with the males. So she behaved more like a male. I cannot ask her identity, but she clearly was, from a distance, she looked like a male. And you have sometimes males who don't play the macho game, who they're big males, they could be the alpha male, but they are not interested in that kind of stuff and they stay out of confrontations. So yeah, we have, of course, also individuals who are more homosexual than heterosexual. So the sexual orientation comes in. So I think the same gender diversity we see in human society, we can find in the societies of chimpanzees and bonobos. And the only big difference is that these individuals, I've never noticed negative reactions to these individuals. It's not like they're not accepted. They're just part of the society. Everyone knows them. Everyone grew up with them. It's no big deal. They don't make a big deal about it. Whereas, as you know, humans tend to do that. So that's the big advantage, actually, of the primate societies, is that these individuals are accepted.
Yeah, I think this is a very important thing, because once I was reading your book, I was like, okay, this can be a great message to the humanity, that in apes, in other primates or non-human primates, they don't differentiate between individuals, no matter what their identity is, right?
Now, they do differentiate. So they know of Donna how she is. Mm-hmm. She's known to, because of course they pay attention to that, but it doesn't bother them. And that's just how she is. And I think they would not accept an individual necessarily who bothers them, who is aggressive or disturbs the peace all the time. They might eject such an individual, but that's not the case usually, because gender diversity is usually not expressed in that kind of behavior.
Yeah, so I meant that they don't discriminate between individuals,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
interesting. Yeah. And then how about other kind of changes? So, for example, in our culture nowadays, another term which is popular, toxic masculinity. How about that? Like, is it really does it really exist, or it's more of cultural thing again?
Yeah, I don't like the term because I know what they mean by the term. They mean there is a certain part of masculine behavior that we don't like. For example, men who insult you all the time or provoke fights or take enormous risks that they don't need to take, So, but it sounds, if you say toxic masculinity, it sounds a bit like you're rejecting masculinity in general. And that's the part I don't agree with. Because in that case, I would say there's also toxic femininity, of course, a certain behavior of women that we don't want. And so it has gotten a bit confusing. I accept that there is certain human male behavior that we don't like, and I don't like. But to elevate that to statements about toxic masculinity, I think goes too far. So I would like to have a discussion between the genders that is mutually respectful and that acknowledges that, yes, men can be bad, women can be bad, but we can also both can be good in some ways,
Yeah, I think it also got popular because there is also another notion that we are male dominated species, but are we?
Yeah, in the present societies, I would say that is probably true. I'm not sure that we are male dominated in the same way that we always have been. And so we have two close relatives. One is female dominated, the bonobo. The females are collectively dominant over the males. The females are not bigger than the males, they're smaller. But collectively they dominate, and the alpha female has a clique of other females around her, and she's the boss of the group. And in the chimpanzees, it's clearly a male-dominated society, and every healthy adult male chimpanzee is dominant over the females. But that's just physical dominance, and in humans too, of course, men are physically dominant over women. But then if you look behind that, if you look at the influence of individuals on society, you see often a different picture. So you may even have in a chimpanzee society, in my previous book, I described Mama, the alpha female chimpanzee. So it's a male-dominated society, but that female had an enormous amount of power. For 40 years, she was the alpha female, so she saw a lot of males come and go as alphas. And she was the one who often decided which male would be the alpha male, because if she put her weight behind him, he had a big advantage. And she organized a lot of things in the group, and so she was the peacemaker also very often in the group. So even in a male-dominated society, a female can have an enormous amount of power. And so I feel you need to make a distinction between dominance and power. And people are sometimes surprised by that, is that because they think everything in the primates must be decided physically. But that's not the case at all. And I don't know why they are so surprised, because in humans too, we don't decide things physically. If you walk into a store in a big city and you want to talk to the boss, you don't necessarily walk up to the biggest guy in the store and assume that that's the boss. No, that he may be just a coworker who is occasionally there. The boss may be an older man or an older woman. Who knows who the boss is? So in humans, we're very used to that things are not necessarily decided physically, even though physical strength is a factor always. And the same is true in primate societies. The smallest male in a chimp group may be the alpha male. If he has the right connections and support from the females, he may be the alpha male. So I think it's very important to make these distinctions. And I would not say necessarily that in humans, the men are naturally better leaders, which people often say, that you better have male leaders. We now come out of the COVID crisis, and we have seen quite a bit of female leadership in the crisis and a bit of male leadership. That was not so great. So I'm not convinced, based on our experience of the last couple of years, that males necessarily make better leaders.
Yeah, and is there any reason? I mean, and what about this collective female power that you mentioned? So what does that mean?
Yeah, it's interesting that the bonobos do that. There is a problem in primate societies and in humans, I would say, is that males can be infanticidal. Males may kill infants sometimes. And this sometimes happens in chimpanzees. It never happens in bonobos. And I think what bonobos have done is designed the perfect counter strategy to this kind of male behavior. Is the females have sex with all sorts of males. So it's impossible for males to exclude certain babies that they see as exclude that they are their offspring. And the females dominate the males. And so if the males get aggressive, they can stop that. So in bonobos, we never have seen infanticide, but in chimpanzees, it's a behavior that occurs sometimes. And in human societies, it occurs also. So that's one of the reasons we think female bonobos got dominant, is to stop certain kinds of male behavior.
Yeah, and since you already mentioned infanticide and other things, so what about the violence factor then? Are the men or the males are the ones to blame there?
Yeah, violence is very much a male thing. That's true in human society. You look at the statistics of every nation, homicide is going to be higher for men than for women. Men are also often the victims, of course, so it's often male-male violence. There's also quite a bit of male-female violence. That's less often, but there's quite a bit of that in human society. And I would say that's more common in human society than in other primate societies. So in chimpanzees, for example, if you look at the numbers that we have from the field, wild chimpanzees, it looks very similar to human data in the sense of it's a lot of male-male violence and then a little bit less of male-female violence. But killing is more typical done by males than by females. So that's sort of a universal difference, a higher level of violence by males. In human society, I think a factor that comes in is that we live in nuclear families and we isolate them. We put them in a house, like a man and a woman and children are in this house and then in that house and then in that house, which allows men to sometimes dominate exclusively a female and to be abusive, which in a primate group would probably be stopped by the surrounding individuals. But in our case, we are isolated. And actually, during the COVID crisis, domestic abuse increased because we were locked up in homes. So in human society, there's actually more violence by men against women, and there's more rape by men against women than in primate societies. Rape in bonobos is absent, and in chimpanzees, it's extremely rare. So I think humans have a problem in that regard.
Yeah, and what about violence in bonobos?
They don't kill each other. We don't have any observed case of one bonobo killing another. So yes, there is aggression. The alpha female certainly asserts her position. She makes clear that she's the alpha female. But the violence level is much lower than in, for example, chimpanzees and in humans. I'm sure one day we're going to discover a killing among bonobos. It's going to happen one day, but it's extremely rare behavior. Yeah.
And the size differences, they still exist in bonobos.
Yeah, the males are bigger than the females. Yeah, that's true for all the primates, almost all the primates. But of course, in humans, the size difference is not so great. If I compare with baboons, where the males are twice the size of females, or gorillas, where males are so much bigger than the females, in humans, it's actually the size difference is existing, and the upper body strength of men is quite a bit substantially greater than of women. But relatively, compared to other primates, it's actually not so impressive, our size difference.
Yeah, so when it comes to violence, again, that's also another factor that we think we can remove through cultural changes, teaching children, etc. So what do you think? Is it possible?
Well, I do think you need to educate boys differently from girls. So I've heard sometimes Gloria Steinem, the feminist here, say that we should raise boys more like girls. That would be a good thing. They would become more sensitive and stuff like that, empathic. I'm not sure. I think a son is something else than a daughter. And a son will grow bigger and stronger and become more violent than a daughter. So you need to deal with that in the education. You need to teach them discipline. You need to teach them to have self-control. So there are different requirements for society. So what you want, of course, is boys who learn to control their strengths and to use it for constructive purposes rather than destructive purposes. That's what you would want as a society. So you need to civilize them more than you need to do that with girls, I would say. So I think the education needs to be different. And it's interesting if you look at, I mentioned all the wrestling behavior by boys and young male primates. That behavior is very important for them. I know that at schools here in the US now, they try to suppress that. They tell children not to touch each other and not to run around and scream and yell at each other and have these mock fights that they do. But I think it's actually very important behavior for young males, because in the process, they learn certain things. They learn fighting skills, which they probably need at some point. They need how to defend themselves. They learn how to win and how to lose in a good way, that it remains fun. They learn how to control their physical strengths, which is extremely important, because a big boy can play with a small boy and they can still have fun together, just as a big dog can play with a small dog and they still can have fun together. That is something that they need to learn. They need to learn to inhibit their physical strengths. And it's very important in human society. If you have, let's say, a family and you have a man in the house who doesn't know that he's much stronger than the woman and much stronger than the children, that's a potentially enormously dangerous man. So he needs to have an enormous amount of self-control. Just like, let's say, a gorilla male who is so big and strong needs to have an enormous amount of self-control. And that's the thing that they learn in all this wrestling behavior that they do. So it is very important, I think, if you want to control violence in society, to have men and boys who have self-discipline, who have learned to control their strengths, to use it for good purposes and not bad purposes. All of that is an important part of education, I would say.
Yeah, so just to comment here, basically you are suggesting that nurture can kind of control nature in a way, right?
Yeah, and nurture is very important. So there are human societies where physical violence is almost absent. From a very young age, they teach the children not to fight and not to hurt each other. Murder is very low in these societies, so they exist. So yes, nurture can have an effect on that.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned is rapes, that in humans, the numbers are really high. That means it does exist in the other primates?
No, because rape is really unusual in the animal kingdom. So in orangutans, we have rapes. Younger males, not the fully grown males, the younger males, adolescent males, they do that. And it's possible in orangutans because the females travel on their own. The females travel through the forest on their own with their children. And so they don't have a defense system against that kind of males. In almost all primates, females are together. So for example, female bonobos, they are the prime example of how a sisterhood defends against the kind of behavior. So females help each other against aggressive males. And rape, otherwise, if we leave the orangutans out of the story, it's extremely rare and unusual behavior. And this is true for many animals. So a book came out, I think it's 20 years ago, that said that rape is a natural behavior. The Natural History of Rape was the title of the book. And it was including also about human rapes. And that was based on such flimsy evidence, because there's very few species that show quite a bit of rape. And if it's such a great evolutionary strategy, as these people were suggesting, you would expect that a lot of animals would do it, and that's not really the case. So look at rape as a rare behavior. In chimpanzees, it's extremely rare. In bonobos, it's absent. In humans, it's unfortunately quite common.
Yeah, so it seems like bonobos are at the other extreme, as you said, that it's rare. And what can be the reason
in what?
In the case of bonobos? Yeah.
Well, because the females are dominant over the males. So if a male would try something like that, the female would scream, and before you know it, he would get all the females after him. So it's easily resolved. So no, it doesn't occur. And in chimpanzees also is extremely rare.
Yeah, that's interesting. So with that, I mean, we can also talk about friendship, cooperation, peacemaking. That's basically your work. So how frequent that is when it comes to other primates as well? Yeah,
the other primates, they have reconciliations after fights, and they maintain friendships despite competition. So males compete. For example, male chimpanzees are very competitive with each other over status, but they're also friends, and they groom each other and they hang out together. I always found that such an interesting dynamic between rivalry and friendship. And sometimes, I'm a biologist, but I've worked for 30 years as a psychology professor. In psychology, in the textbooks, they often describe male friendships in sort of derogatory terms, like males, they call themselves friends, but all they do is hang out together and look at sports, and they don't talk about personal problems. And so the authors of the textbooks in psychology, they are impressed by female friendships because the women talk with each other and reveal secrets to each other, but they're not impressed by male friendships. And I always think that's unfortunate, because I think it is because men are both rivals and friends at the same time, and they don't know how to handle that. But the men know very well how to handle it, and men like to hang out with each other. I'm from a family of 6 boys, and so I'm very used to male-male relationships. Men do like to hang out with each other and have a lot of fun with each other, despite the fact that they also have some rivalries going, which is for men really not a big deal to handle the two of them at the same time. So yeah, male and female friendships, I think, are different. I think both of them are important and strong and play an important role in the lives of people. And both of them have ways of resolving tensions and problems between them. And men cycle very easily through confrontation and reconciliation, and often the next day they don't even know they had a fight with somebody. They forget these things, whereas women would not forget these things. I think the strategy of women is, I described it in my book, the strategy of women is peacekeeping and man is peacemaking. And what I mean is that women try to keep the peace, try to avoid confrontation, because if they have confrontations, it's very hard to get over them. So they try to stay out of confrontations. And if they have a certain woman that they don't like, they're going to avoid that woman. That's the best way to stay out of problems. Men, they cycle very easily through these things. They may have a fight, and then 5 minutes later they're laughing about it. So yeah, since they cycle more easily about it, they have more a peacemaking strategy. They don't mind the confrontation, and then they get over it quite easily. So it's very different strategies, but both of them are capable of maintaining friendships, lifelong friendships, which is remarkable. But both genders are capable of doing that.
Yeah, to the same extent?
I think so. I think I've never heard that male friendships are shorter or longer. Actually, friendships among girls, we know it for younger people. The friendships among girls have a shorter life than the friendships among boys. It's because boys, they hang out in gangs often, like a small group of 5 or 6 boys, and they keep hanging out. And even if they have a fight, they get over that. Whereas girls have more dyadic friendships, and if something happens in that relationship, it's broken up. So I don't know if for adult men and women the same rules apply. I'm not sure that that's the case. I've never heard actually of a big difference in that regard.
Yeah, then the other factor is, maintaining this monogamous relationships. That's again interesting. I mean, because I think all the primates, all the non-human primates, they are non-monogamous, right?
Well, we have a few. The gibbons, they have male, female. Yeah, we have a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, monogamy. It's a difficult topic because I'm not sure we are naturally monogamous. And I'm not sure that that's true for many primates. And we usually, in the animal literature, we make a distinction between social monogamy and genetic monogamy, in the sense that social monogamy is when a male and a female do things together, raise offspring and stuff. But some of the offspring may not be fertilized by the male. There may be some other male involved. That's why we make a distinction with genetic monogamy, which is actually very rare in the animal kingdom. So, and as I would say the same is probably true for humans, is that, yes, we have these family arrangements, man and woman live together, raise offspring, but that doesn't mean that in terms of sexual behavior, it's completely monogamous. And we all know that in humans, it is not completely monogamous.
Yeah. But then when it comes to sex, it's another topic is same-sex sex. So
yeah,
that was an interesting chapter in your book as well. So how common it is in the other primates?
That's very common, actually. So homosexual sex has been known for a long time in other animals. It has often been ignored. It's a bit like in human society. We often have ignored it. So in the primates, all the primates have some degree of homosexual activity going on. In most cases, it's not like you have gay individuals. They're not exclusively homosexual. But, in humans, that's rare too. In humans, they say people who are interested in homosexual interaction is maybe 4 or 5% of the population. But exclusive homosexuality, they say, is 0.5%. So that's a very small minority. And who knows, in the other primates, these individuals may exist. In bonobos, I would say they're perfectly bisexual. They have sex with males with males, males with females, females with females. Female sex is actually very common in the bonobo. And so the bonobos have a lot of homosexual activity. In other species, it's a sort of the minority of interactions, but still quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope some politicians now won't try to stop them.
Yeah, so it is something, I always look at it as a sort of combination of same gender attraction, which is present in all the primates. Males hang out with males, females hang out with females, which is also true for humans, of course, very often. So you have this same gender attraction, and it combines somehow with sexual attraction, and that's how you get homosexual behavior. So people have written entire volumes about how could homosexuality have evolved, like the big puzzle, but it's actually quite common, and it doesn't interfere with reproduction. So I don't think it's such a big puzzle as they think it is.
Yeah, I think the puzzle would be a transgender part. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, transgender, in human society, we think it's, at the moment in the US, we think it's 0.6%. So less than 1%. That sounds very low, but it's still a couple of million people in a country like the US. So it's actually quite common. We don't know how it comes about. We don't know if certain genes are involved. Same thing with homosexuality. We don't know if there are certain genes, of course, involved, but there's not a gay gene, for example, clearly. And the same is, I think, true for trans. But we do think it arises very early in life. It arises at 3-4 years of age, that the child who is, let's say, born as a boy says, I'm actually a girl. And we also know from a recent study that children don't change their mind. So I think it was a couple of thousand children who were followed over 6 years, and only 2.5%, which is very low, 2.5% of them had changed their mind after 6 years, meaning that the vast majority, they think, I'm this, identify as a certain gender, and they stick to it. So it arises early in life. It is basically irreversible, even though society works very hard to try to reverse these kids. They don't. That indicates to me that it's deep down in them. It's not something superficial, as some people try to suggest. It's deep down in them, and we don't know exactly where it comes from, but we need to respect that kind of decision that they make. Yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be difficult to study in other primates, right? Like beyond humans.
Yeah, we cannot ask them their identity, but Donna, the chimpanzee, I would say probably identified as a male because he acted a lot like a male. So we don't know how that comes about, if that's hormonal or what it is. We really don't know. There is a theory about it by Dick Swab, the neuroscientist in Amsterdam, who studied the brains of transgender people. And he thinks it's possible that during fetal development, the genitals differentiate in male and female before the brain. The brain is in the second half of the pregnancy, and the genitals in the first half of the pregnancy. And that these two processes get somehow disconnected. So in most development, they go in the same direction. The genitals differentiate, let's say, into male and female, and the brain does the same thing and in some it disconnects. But he also doesn't know why that happens. So we still have a big puzzle there. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be still difficult to explain because then does that mean that you already have this kind of male brain or female brain from the fetus itself, right?
Yeah.
So that'll, I think, again complicate the
yeah, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I don't know how these things happen, but I do think when trans people say that it's inside of them, that it's not some sort of exterior decision that they have made later in their life, I believe that. And we have had the same discussion about homosexuality, of course, is for a long time this was called a lifestyle. And now most of us, we recognize that these people, they are born this way. And so I think we need to respect that. Yeah.
Yeah, the respecting part, I think that should be in general, how to say, part of the human society itself, right? I mean,
yeah, but that's the big discussion at the moment, is that to what degree do we let these people be what they are? That's a big discussion at this moment in my country here in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your take on that? Because this is interesting. I mean, at the end, of course, these are labels. That's what we were talking about, that, these are cultural metaphors in a way, right? Scientifically, we won't have, I don't know how we would be able to explain a homosexual or transgender person, right?
No.
It'll be really difficult, but these are cultural metaphors. I mean, of course, the discrimination shouldn't be there, but then yes, where do we stop when it comes to this point?
What do you mean? Is that there should be limits to our acceptance?
So how do we limit? Can science help in that direction?
I think science is going to help. For example, the discussion about homosexuality was changed by science when the scientists demonstrated that homosexual people occur everywhere in the world. It's not just in Western society. Everywhere we can find them. And that in animals we can see homosexual activity. That was part of the argument to make homosexual behavior more accepted, because it was not some sort of cultural fluke or something. So I think it is important. The scientists can contribute to this discussion by finding out where it comes from and how widespread these things are. You know?
Yeah, let's just talk about one more element, which is the maternal instinct and xenophobia in general. So, I mean, of course, when we are thinking about these topics, we think of directly females doing it. But how common it is in other primates?
Well, the maternal instinct. Okay, I'm not sure I want to call it an instinct. Because an instinct gives you the impression that females are born with the skills to raise offspring, which is not the case. They are born with the physical abilities to produce an offspring, but once the kid is born, many primates don't know what to do. And it's actually not very logical. If, let's say, you're a gorilla female and you have a baby in your lap, how does that baby get to your nipple? That's not logical. It needs to be brought there. So the female needs to know where the baby needs to go. And she needs to learn that. And we know that because in many zoos, when they have apes or monkeys who get babies and have never seen an example of how you raise a baby, they're not able to do it. So it's something they need to learn. And the way they learn that is by holding the babies of adult females. So that's why young females, I think, are so interested in dolls and in babies, is because they need to learn the maternal skills. And they do that by imitating adult females who have babies, or by holding their babies and putting them on their back and walking around with them. And if you give them dolls, they will hold a doll, and they will also hold the doll against their nipple and so on. So maternal instinct is not a good term. There's an interest in females in babies, but that's all you can say. They need to learn a lot of things. And sometimes in present society, it is presented as if males lack completely in any of these capacities. So, for example, in the US, we have conservative politicians who make fun of paternity leaves. They say, yeah, maternity leaves they can understand, but paternity leaves, that's nonsense. Why would we need it? Because men don't take care of children and so on. And that's a strange thing, because actually men have quite a bit of caring tendencies, are very well capable of it. There are, after all, men who raise children because the woman has disappeared or died or whatever the reason is, or they are part of a gay couple or whatever the reason is. So, and in the other primates, what I found interesting is that in chimpanzees and bonobos, the males do very little in offspring care, but they are capable of it. So sometimes a female chimp, let's say, loses her life and dies, and all of a sudden there is a young 5-year-old, 4-year-old chimpanzee, post-weaning is important, who needs help. And those kids are often picked up by adult males. So there are reports from the field of adult males, even alpha males, who have adopted a young individual, and not just for a couple of days. They may adopt them for a couple of years. They may carry them around for years and protect them and raise them, basically. So even in chimps and bonobos, where the males do very little in offspring care, we see that they are capable of it. And in humans, I would say, since we have evolved nuclear families, the males are even better at it. I think that we have evolved even more of these tendencies. And so, yes, many men maybe do very little with children, but they are perfectly capable of it. And I think if we change society and it requires men to step up and do a bit more, I don't think that's a natural development necessarily.
That's interesting. You know, although men now should be ready for the paternity leaves.
Yeah. And many men actually enjoy paternity leaves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about xenophobia?
that's a very different story. You mean not liking the outgroup?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very strong in the chimpanzee. It's very weak in the bonobo. The bonobo groups, when they meet, they mingle, they interact with each other. The females groom each other between the groups. And experiments have been done with, on altruistic behavior, where they find that bonobos are willing to do something to help a stranger, someone they've never seen before. So bonobos are not xenophobic, but chimpanzees are very xenophobic and will try to kill somebody who's from another group. And unfortunately, humans are a bit like that. I think humans have a bit in common with the chimp in that regard. We are a xenophobic species. Yeah.
Yeah, but is it the same when it comes to kind of including children or females, or the males, or the resistance is same to like all the individuals?
Yeah, it's mostly a male-male thing. The territoriality of humans is mostly male-male. And we see that at the moment, for example, in the Ukraine. We see that women and children left the country. They could step on buses and leave the country. If a bunch of men would step on a bus, the bus would be blown up. They would be killed. They cannot just leave the country. It's not gonna. They may be killed by their own people, or they may be killed by the enemy, but it's not going to be possible. So war and territorial conflict is mostly a male-male thing. I sometimes use that, and I've done that in my book, is that when we speak of male privilege in society, there is clearly male privilege in society. That only applies to a peaceful society. I was born right after World War II, and I know if I had been born 50 years earlier, I probably would have been recruited into an army and I would have been killed on some battlefield, because many, many boys were killed during that period of time. So male privileges applies to peaceful societies, but when societies are at war, it's not a good thing to be a man. It's not a good thing. So that's very unfortunate, is that we cause the problems, we men, we cause these problems, but we also suffer from these problems. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's dwell a little bit on nature nurture part, because I think that kind of brings the gist of it. So when we talk about all these different abilities or properties, how far we can say that nurture can change nature?
We are a very flexible species. So our cultures are very powerful. So I think we can change quite a few things. But not everything. There are certain limits to it. So some people, of course, have this attitude that we humans, we can change, we can be whatever we want to be. That's not the case. So for example, the mother-child bond, very old, is 200 million years old, because we are mammals and all the mammals have a mother-child bond automatically. There's oxytocin involved, there's nursing involved, and so on. That is not something you can easily do away with. So for example, the kibbutz in Israel, they have tried that. That there was a period of time where they tried to separate children from the parents and raise the children collectively. And they had to abandon that because the human parents were very unhappy with this arrangement. They were very stressed by it. They couldn't stand that their children were not sleeping in the same house as where they were sleeping. And so they had to abandon this plan. I think the mother-child bond is one of these biological givens that we have to respect in society. So there are certain things that we have to respect in society that we cannot change. But other things, the level of aggression, we can change, I think. The level of cooperation we can change, the level of tolerance. There's many things we can change in society. So we have that capacity because we are cultural beings. And so if we teach children differently, they're going to behave differently.
Yeah, so when we were discussing that how far we can go with these changes, I think this is where science can also kind of contribute. But the only thing is that how do we understand that these are the properties that we can change? Like you gave one example, mother-child bond, which is, I mean, of course, good. But when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to aggression and tolerance and these kind of issues, which are, um, we consider them socially bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with that? How do we understand that, that we don't suppress something which is not suppressible in a way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how you would go about. I think society experiments with that all the time. We try to step in here and step in there. And so we try to change behavior. So for example, at the moment, one of the big changes is that, at least in Western society, is that men are getting more involved in care for the family. That's where the paternity leaves come in, for example. And I don't think we have reached a limit in that regard. So we're just experimenting with it. How does that go? Do men have a satisfying life if they do so? Is it good for the children? We can ask all these questions. We have, for example, gay couples who raise children. And in the beginning, there was resistance to that. People said that it cannot be good for them. But it turns out that we do studies now, and we find that these kids are basically the same as other kids. And so I think in society we experiment with things, and we will find out by doing so what is possible and what is not possible.
Yeah, so the psychologist that I interviewed, Robert Plomin, who has this controversial kind of statement that but it was interesting in a way once I got to know his view. So his message is that all of us, we are born with certain blueprint or certain abilities. And the struggle is that how this blueprint is suitable to the nurture, the environment that we give it to any being or any child. um, I mean, I
Sure.
just think it's pretty solid, but yeah.
It doesn't sound as a
Yeah,
bad idea to me, yeah.
yeah,
There is an enormous amount of individual variability. That is so interesting, is that as a biologist, of course, we're very used to that. We know that I'm looking at the forest here, but there's no two trees in the forest who are identical. So in biology, we know that there's always individual variability, which is why it is so surprising that people are surprised by the gender diversity that we find in other primates, because of course each individual is different. And so we shouldn't be surprised that sometimes there are individuals who are a bit more homosexual and others who are, most of them who are a bit more heterosexual. We shouldn't be surprised by that variability that exists. So we're very used to that in biology. Biology is often depicted as very rigid, like everything is organized in this way. That is not how biology works. Biology is actually very flexible.
yeah. The other thing is this: in general, we like to think in this categorical thinking. So we like to
Yeah,
divide
yeah,
stuff, and so I think we have problem with the grays. We are fine with the white and blacks. With the
yeah.
grays, it's an issue. So
We are a symbolic species, so we put labels on everything.
yeah,
You are a man, you are a woman, you are homosexual, you're heterosexual. And even, for example, people who are bisexual, they were not recognized for a long time because no one wanted to believe them. Even the homosexual community didn't want bisexuals, and the heterosexual community didn't want them. And they looked at them as a sort of an experimental phase or something like that. Now we know that they actually exist. There is research on that. They're actually people who like both genders, so to speak. So yeah, we are a very pigeonholing, labeling species. And that makes our life more difficult. It has advantages because I can talk to you over a distance here. So it has good things, but it also has disadvantages, I think.
yeah. The other good things is that the scientists like you who can study other primates and give us this insightful information that how our nature has evolved. So that's another great thing. So what else is coming from your side after writing a book on gender? Are you planning on another book?
No, I'm not at the moment. I'm not planning. I'm too busy because the book is coming out in, I think, 15 languages. So I'm too busy going to places like Paris or Germany to promote the book at the moment and do interviews. But at some point, I will probably orient to a new book at some point. Yeah.
Perfect. So with that, thank you so much for accepting the
You're welcome.
invitation and sharing these great ideas. And I think in the book, what I really like those, I mean, even in the last book, it was there, the animations that you have added. They are amazing. Yeah.
My
So thank you for
drawings.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.